And we are live, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And of course, there are no classrooms right now. Everyone's stuck at home, so we really appreciate our live groups joining from across Ontario, and our tons of folks joining on YouTube as well as we continue to highlight scientists and explorers. I'm really excited today because we are joined by a new speaker. So Dr. Adam Smith is a senior biostatistician at Canadian Wildlife Services. And a few of you, maybe all of you, will remember a huge story in the news for conservation, sort of a dark story from late last year, which was that since 1970, we have lost 3 billion birds in North America alone. And this is, I mean, it's hard to even fathom something like this, but how did they come up with that number? Well, Adam was one of the lead members of the team that came up with that figure, and he's going to explain today a little bit about his story going from field biologist to data science and why it's so important to share this sort of information with the public. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Smith, and take us away.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Thanks everyone for coming out. I'm really excited to talk to you all today, and hopefully this will be really interesting. And now I'll remember to share my screen so that you can actually see what I'm talking about. Okay, here it comes. Almost.
Take 3.
There we go.
Good to go.
Okay. Super. Thanks everyone for coming out. I'm really looking forward to hearing some questions and answering some questions and telling you a little bit about what I think of as the greatest job on earth. Maybe not everyone would think that, but here we go. So data science for bird conservation. So that's me in the middle there, scratching my head. And so my job, the greatest job on earth, is all about this brilliant combination of birds and statistics. And so I spend my days, the really good days, making graphs and analyzing data and discovering new things about how bird populations are changing over time, and ideally about how we can help recover some of those declining populations and learn from the populations that are increasing. And so when I was, my journey to biostatistician was complicated. And so, when I was a teenager, this little picture down here, this grainy little picture is a picture of me protesting outside the 1992 preparatory committee meetings for the Rio summit. I wanted to save the world, and I wanted also to spend a lot of time outside, a lot of canoeing and wildlife biology. And if someone had told me that I was going to be a biostatistician, first of all, I would have asked for a definition. Okay, a what? And second of all, I would have been a bit surprised. This picture of me kayaking here is literally taken in the middle of my third year university biostatistics course, biostatistics midterm exam. It was a beautiful day, and the idea of sitting in a biostats exam was just not working for me. So what I wanted to be is a guy who ran around the woods, reading Farley Mowat, Never Cry Wolf, and chasing critters around in the woods. And so for the first little while in my biology career, that's what I did. I spent some time up in Labrador, in the Northwest Territories. We were living in this tiny little cabin for 3 years on end, just me and a dog and the odd other wildlife biologist to help. And we were chasing marten around. This little critter down here inside my coat has been anesthetized, and we were putting a radio collar on it. And so I was just keeping it warm before we let it go. That's a pretty fun experience to have a little a large weasel wake up inside your shirt. I think it's moving now. Let's let it go. Anyways, so I did all sorts of fun stuff. Grizzly bear surveys, that's me in a grizzly bear den, caribou surveys, wolverine surveys. It was pretty fun work. But as I was doing all of that work, I kept coming up against our understanding of what the numbers we were collecting, the observations we were making out in the field were actually telling us about the system that we wanted to understand. You can count a lot of wolverines, you can count a lot of birds, but a lot of things affect what you count on any given day in any given situation. And so you need statistics to tease out the signal, the real information from the noise, the random variation, all the things, the weather, who had been through that area before that day, all the other things that are going on in that system that might affect what you count on any given day. And so I went back to school a little while ago now, and got a PhD. And at the start of my PhD, again, it was going to be mostly about conservation. And by the end of my PhD, it was all about statistics. It was, it was very data heavy. And by the end of my PhD, I was okay with that, which surprised me. I discovered that I was fascinated by not just the questions we were asking in terms of conservation and ecology, but by the way in which we ask those questions, the tools we use, the sort of mathematical and statistical tools we use to answer those questions. And so, and on top of that, actually, after I finished my PhD, I got super lucky and fell into this dream job that opened up 6 months after I finished my PhD. And as a little granola growing up in the wilds of the Ottawa Valley, working for the Canadian Wildlife Service was, oh my God, really? You work for the Canadian Wildlife Service? That's so cool. And I got lucky and landed my job. And then, over the course of my job, that I've been doing for about the last 10 years, I've made connections and worked closely with biologists and statisticians across North America and in lots of great cases around the world. And one of these neat collaborations that I've been involved in more recently was this study looking at the number of birds in North America. And that sounds simple. When you it's the number of birds in North America, how hard can that be? It's profoundly difficult. Counting birds, that they don't stand still, and there's a lot of them, and so it's difficult to count the number of birds. And that was what we set out to do. We set out to measure the number of birds in North America for every year from 1970 all the way to 2017. Essentially, those are the years for which we have information that we could do this sort of thing. And what we found when we crunched those numbers, when I was running the initial models, and I got out the answer, and the answer said, well, basically that number has changed by 3 billion birds. We've lost 3 billion birds over the last 50 years. And my first reaction was, oh, what did I do wrong? I must have done something wrong. That can't possibly be right. And of course, in the process of writing the scientific paper and double checking, triple, quadruple checking all those numbers, we just said, no, that really is. That's our best estimate of how the populations of birds in North America have changed. And this came out in September and got just tremendous response in the press, and probably rightfully so, because I think it's a really staggering, a really striking number. But again, 3 billion, that's a big number, and 3 billion out of how many? Did we count them all? And so we don't actually count all of the birds, but we count a lot of them. And the reason we count a lot of them is largely because we have this brilliant network of volunteer birders across North America, people who are really skilled, really good at identifying birds, and people who are just learning to identify birds. Many different programs, many different opportunities to contribute. Some of these organizations, Birds Canada, and in the US, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, the ABC, American Bird Conservancy, and Audubon, coordinate many different programs that are sort of rigorous counting processes for birds, where a group of people or a single person goes to a particular spot and conducts a count, and then those counts go into a central database and get stored over time. And on top of that, there are professional biologists across the continent. So people who work for my colleagues at the Canadian Wildlife Service, colleagues in the Fish and Wildlife, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service south of the border, at the USGS, that are collecting other information on birds, monitoring in some cases, running helicopter surveys for waterfowl across the boreal forest and the prairies, banding birds, getting estimates of return rates and tracking migrations. All sorts of work is going into that. And all of those data go into some centralized database, and then I get to do something. I get to play with all of those data. And that's where the statistics and the math comes in. to try and figure out what all of that information means in terms of how populations have changed over time. And so, for example, here's a picture of an evening grosbeak, a reasonably common, still reasonably common feeder bird. Back when I was a kid in the 70s, 80s, 90s, a much more common feeder bird. We take observations of species like this, and we generate the kinds of graphs that you're seeing here. And this is what I think of as a population trajectory graph. And essentially, we have a relative abundance measure on the vertical axis and time, years, on the horizontal axis. And what this graph tells us, this estimates tell us, is that up until about the mid-90s, evening grosbeaks were much more frequently observed, much more commonly observed in higher abundance. And then from the mid-90s to about the early 2000s, there was a dramatic decline in how abundant they were. And so you'll see lots of graphs like that. That kind of graph is my bread and butter every day. I make and look at. Some days far too many of those graphs. And here's another example where, Baltimore oriole, a reasonably common bird, again, its populations have declined over time. We also generate really cool, I think it was really cool maps, these sort of heat maps here, where the red regions of the continent are areas where Baltimore orioles have declined. The darker the red, the more they've declined. The blue areas are a few areas where their populations have increased over the last 50 years. And so we can explore the kind of spatiotemporal aspects of those changes in populations. And then on top of that, we have other models that don't track necessarily the change in populations over the time, but the size, the absolute size of those populations. And so we can, with other data, we can estimate how many birds are actually out there. And that, again, it's deceptively, it seems simple on the surface of it. Well, you make an estimate of how many birds are there, but it's actually extremely complicated to do because they're hard to see. You don't count them all, and the number that you count on any given location or any time of day is affected by lots of things: the weather, the other birds in the area, et cetera, et cetera. For example, if you go into your backyard and you count 3 chickadees, you can't say, okay, well, my backyard is this much space, and then I'll just extrapolate that out, multiply it up by the number of backyards in the world, and that'll give me the number of chickadees, because tomorrow you might go out and count 0 chickadees. And if you multiply that number up, you still get 0. And so something's got to give there. And so that's where the statistics come in. So we've got estimates of changes in the population over time, and we have estimates of the size of those populations. And again, so we take those two things. We also have uncertainty around all of that process. And so there's a little bit of uncertainty on the population trajectories, there's uncertainty on the population estimates. And then my job in this 3 billion birds paper was to come up with a way of combining all of that information for 529 species across North America, account for all the uncertainties, and turn that into annual population estimates for every species in North America from 1970 to 2017. If you have annual population size estimates, then you can basically just add them all up and get a number of birds in North America for every year from 1970 to 2017. And if you do that, that's what the graph looks like. It goes from about 10 billion in 1970 down to about 7 billion in 2017. And if you express that, this is the graph that got picked up more because it looks worse. If you express that on a numbered lost scale, this is what that pattern looks like. If everyone's wondering about that scaling of the graph and how it might be misleading, ask me a question about it afterwards, because I'd love to talk about that. There was a long discussion about whether or not that was an okay graph to make. Anyways, and so on top of that, what we discovered is that not only is there an overall loss of birds, we've lost 3 billion, that's almost 30% of the total number of birds on the continent. This is an entire class of organisms, and we're missing 30% of them across the board. And not only that, we're missing them in almost every biome. And so every habitat type, whether it's wetlands, forests, et cetera, that number has declined in all of those areas. There are some areas that have declined more: grassland birds, boreal forest birds, some of the habitat generalists, even the introduced species. even the ones we think of as being not only tolerant of human activity, but actually dependent on it. So things like pigeons and starlings and house sparrows, those species, if they were native, would be on the endangered species list because they've declined by that much over the last 50 years. So even those tolerant species, and again, right there's the native ones, the habitat generalists, even they've declined a whole bunch. The only group that we see, at least in terms of the biomes, the only groups where we see a positive change is in wetlands. And that's interesting. I'll come back to that. And so what we're seeing here are declines not in rare or species that we would think of as endangered necessarily. These are declines in the most common birds that we see in our day-to-day lives. Things like red-winged blackbirds. We've lost over 100 million red-winged blackbirds. Savanna sparrows, meadowlarks, very common birds. 9 million Baltimore orioles. 15 million wood thrush. 26 million barn swallows. 170 million dark-eyed juncos. Juncos are birds we still see. They're still common. There were a lot to begin with. That's why we could lose 170 million of them. They're a common feeder bird. In fact, there was one singing outside my window just earlier this morning. But it's not all bad news. There's a profound change happening here that is really important for us to understand, but it's not across the board. There are some bright lights here. As an example, chickadees. Chickadees have increased over the last 50 years. And some groups have increased a lot. And this is something, here's an example that I bet many of you have experienced in your daily lives. If you're as old as me, you probably remember as a kid, seeing a bald eagle was almost literally impossible. It did not happen outside of maybe Alaska or the so areas of the West Coast in BC. There were some remnant populations that were hanging on, but in Eastern Canada and the Eastern US, they were almost extinct. And now seeing a bald eagle is a reasonably common occurrence. There are two groups of birds in this report that give us hope, and I think sort of point the way towards ways in which we can recover some of the birds that we've lost over the last 50 years. And so waterfowl and raptors have both increased in the last 50 years. And you can see this little pie chart at the top left corner is out of that 3 billion birds paper. So the number lost and the different families of birds that are lost, it's a larger circle than the blue circle over here, which is the ones that have gained. The losses are larger than the gains, but there are these patterns in the gains that are really interesting. And so we see vireos have increased over time, raptors, turkeys, we all know turkeys have increased, at least in this part of the world. Ducks and geese, gnatcatchers. Bet you didn't even know there was such a thing as a gnatcatcher. I love gnatcatchers. They're adorable little things. Anyways, so vireos and gnatcatchers, ducks and geese and raptors. And the recoveries in waterfowl and raptors are one of the most important things that sort of shine the light towards where we should be headed in terms of conservation. And so this graph you're seeing here is out of a different report. This is a report that came out last summer called The State of Canada's Birds. And I'll mention a website that you can go to. It's easy to remember, stateofcanadasbirds.org, to find out more about this. And it shows that same pattern. So we definitely have some groups that are in trouble, but we have these two groups, waterfowl and birds of prey, that are increasing. And really they're increasing because of things we've done. So birds of prey in the 1970s, that was the end of the era of DDT. And DDT was an extremely toxic pesticide that was poisoning birds of prey. It was bioaccumulating, so getting more and more concentrated as you went up the food chain, and causing birds of prey to essentially causing their eggs to break, and so they couldn't reproduce. And so populations of birds of prey across the continent were crashing. to the point where things like bald eagle and peregrine falcons got put on the endangered species lists in Canada and the US. But then DDT was banned, and the raptors have recovered. Waterfowl were historically at much, much lower populations because of overhunting and the destruction of wetlands. And in the last 50 years, we've made tremendous progress on better management of our waterfowl hunting and better protections for wetland habitats. And as a result, waterfowl have recovered. And so what that tells us is that our past successes with conservation show us that when we understand the problem and we take action, birds recover. And so we have lost 3 billion birds. There's been a tremendous decline in some of the most common birds in North America. And that tells us something, I think, about the health of our natural ecosystems and changes that are happening that even bird biologists hadn't really realized. Like I said, when we first saw this number, there was a lot of skepticism in our group of people who think a lot about birds and who watch birds a lot. Even we were skeptical of these numbers at first. And yet this decline has happened without us kind of noticing it. But there's hope, and there are things that we can do. So in terms of sources of information to get to some of the what we do next information, there are 2 websites that I think are really worth checking out. There's many of them. Birds are brilliant. People love birds, and so there's a lot of resources out there right now to help you discover the worlds of birds. And birds really are I think of as the kind of the gateway to understanding the natural world. They sing, they're beautiful, they fly. How could we not be transfixed by them? But these two websites, www.3billionbirds.org, that was a website that was set up directly in response to this paper. The co-authors on this paper, there's a fairly long list of us, and we span a lot of the major conservation organizations in the US and Canada. And a lot of those organizations saw this result coming, knew that this paper was in preparation. And so they put together this really neat source of information, this website, specifically to go with along with this paper. And it has tremendous information on it. It has some really neat videos. It's really inspiring videos talking about the result and what it means, what we can do about it. They've got some neat, direct actions that people can take, individuals can take, and similarly, the State of Canada's Birds. So www.stateofcanadasbirds.org. If you go there, you can read that recent Canadian report, and you can again find out lots of things that you can do as an individual, and that we as a society need to do in order to make the necessary changes to keep our the ecological support system that we as humans rely on to keep it healthy and functioning, and keep those birds around.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Smith. What a fantastic presentation. The feedback's been tremendous on YouTube, and I'm sure for our live groups too. We've got people tuning in from New York, Rhode Island, New Brunswick, across Ontario, and more. So really appreciate you sharing all this with us today. If you'd like to come out of screen share, well, I put both the links to those organizations or to those websites in the YouTube chat bar so people can check them out. And for our live viewers, I'll share them with you in an email when we're done. So what we're going to do now, everyone, is dive into Q&A. And so for our live groups, I'll come to you one by one and make sure you get some questions in. If you're on YouTube, let me know where you're joining from, and I'll take your questions, as many as possible. And Adam, I wanted to kick off with a question that we just got while you were talking that last little bit from Margaret Campbell on YouTube. And she wants to know, would people keeping track of the birds they see at home during the 4 seasons help to your statistics and help us understand what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. And so there are some really neat programs out there. Some of them are very rigorous monitoring programs that if you're a super keen, super awesome Uber birder, you can contribute to. And there are many other programs as well that you can contribute to, even if you never leave your backyard, which these days is true for all of us. But really good sources of information to check out. So check out the Audubon Society. Birds Canada has some awesome programs, some volunteers programs that people can get involved in. And also check out eBird. So eBird, one word, .org, the letter E, eBird.org. It has, it's from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology in the US. They are brilliant. Their website in general is just a fantastic place to go to discover things about birds. They have a companion website, allaboutbirds.org, at which you can learn all kinds of cool things. But eBird itself is a program for gathering observations about birds, and they have a really neat smartphone app. And so you can be standing out in your backyard, you see a bird, you open up your eBird app, and you say, I saw that species, and it tells you, okay, well, did you see it here and now? Yes, and guides you through the whole process. Really neat, and it can be almost addictive. It's really fun.
How cool is that? I'd already actually preempted this. Every single time we have a bird session, an individual working on birds, they always mention the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. So allaboutbirds.org in the YouTube chat bar. I do encourage you to check that out. It's fantastic. All right, I'm going to go to Amy joining us live in Grimsby, Ontario. If you want to share us a question, go for it.
Hi, I'm just wondering if there's any companion studies looking at the impact of the loss of birds on, say, pest control or pollination, or any sort of related studies. And what a lot of my students are interested in careers in conservation, environmental science, but they don't picture themselves they picture themselves doing field work. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to career opportunities, in field work, and then looking at companion studies.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Thanks, Aaron. So there are absolutely companion studies that are ongoing and have been done looking at the consequences of losing that many birds. In a nutshell, things that we understand already is that 3 billion fewer birds means 3 billion fewer birds out there eating insects that are pests in agricultural systems, dispersing seeds across the environment. And this is not trivial. Singing in our backyards and in our neighborhoods, people have a very strong connection to birds. And so the sort of ecosystem service that birds provide is to people in terms of our emotional health is not trivial. There are ongoing studies as well looking at that kind of issue. What else? The second part of your question was, about field opportunities. Yes, right. And so absolutely, there's tons of field opportunities. I described my career path as heading off into the field doing biology, and that was tons of fun. When I talk about my job now being the best job in the world, most of the people I went to school with look at me funny. And so there are tons of opportunities out there to work in the field. And those might be research opportunities. There are organizations, well, for instance, the Canadian Wildlife Service, absolutely. We have hundreds of biologists across the country, and all but a few of us are in the field on a regular basis. There are also consulting companies doing some really neat work around monitoring developments and assessing the impacts of developments across the country and across the continent, really. And then there are all the NGOs, the conservation organizations. So Birds Canada, the Cornell Lab, and Audubon, et cetera, et cetera. And if folks are interested in those sorts of field opportunities, if students are interested in getting out into the field, some of the really important field skills that people need are bird related. And so if you can develop your expertise to identify birds, particularly identifying by sound is really important, at least for the songbirds. If you can develop those field identification skills, then all of a sudden you can be very employable.
Fantastic. Adam, that was a great answer. I want to pass along a question from YouTube before we go back to some of our live groups. So Professor Shoshana Jacobs, thank you for joining from Guelph. That's fantastic. So she wanted to know, do you want to go back to your question, you really wanted to talk about this graph and how it was laid out. So can you explain a little bit about the specific graph and why?
Yeah. Right. Yeah, right. So that graph, I showed you two graphs. I showed you one that had, it started at 10 billion and went down to 7 billion. And one that started at 3 or started at 0 and went down to -3. And -3 was at the bottom line. And so the data scientists, the statisticians out there who are used to thinking critically about stuff they see on the internet, graphs that they see on Fox News, that sort of thing. Sorry, Fox News. Might look at that and say, well, that's misleading. You know, -3 isn't the baseline. That's not 0. And that was my initial reaction too. I was like, no, we can't put a graph like that in. That's not fair. And then we started to think about it more and more, and we thought, well, wait a minute. So that one that starts at 10 billion and goes down to 7 billion, it has the 0 line on it. But what does that 0 line mean? Is that a relevant 0? That 0 line means the extinction of an entire class of organisms at a continental scale. That's apocalyptic. That's not a relevant 0 line that we should be thinking about in terms of changing bird populations in North America. And so we eventually made the decision that graph was actually more misleading than the other one that just shows the shape of the decline over time. And we let that 3 billion number stand as it was. Yeah, so that was a really, from a statistics standpoint and a data science standpoint, that was a hard one to think about. It was complicated.
I like how in one answer you managed to court controversy from like data people and Republicans all at once. Very well done. We're gonna go to our live group with Mara. If you have a question, Mara, you're unmuted. Come on up.
I don't have a question, but it was a great presentation. It was very informative. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mara. That's fantastic.
Thank you, Mara.
All right, let's go to Ms. Maraki, joining us in Thunder Bay, Ontario. If you have a question from your students or from yourself, go for it.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing your story, Dr. Smith, because I'm always encouraging my students to pay attention to what they're really passionate about and how that can lead to a career path. So I think that was an important message. One of the 7 steps of things that everybody can do to sort of help this trend go back up is, I noticed something about the house cats, and I've been following this story for a little while about New Zealand enforcing certain restrictions on cat owners, having to have them tagged, keeping them indoors, things like that. After the publishing of the study, what was the response from government organizations or other things that would actually lead to a change, even in that small way? How do you think the public in Canada would react to having restrictions on their domestic animals to help the bird populations?
Great question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And if my cat was here, he would tell you that everyone should let their cats outside, but he'd be wrong. And he doesn't go outside ever. And so it's such a tricky thing, because I get it. I'm a cat owner. I understand how enjoyable it is for the cat to go outside and do the things that cats love to do. What we've been learning over the last decade or so as we study cats more and more, and the number of cats that are out there in the environment and the average number of things that those cats kill, is that.
Oh, Adam, you've frozen for a second. Let's see if we can get you back.
Of cats that were allowed to free reign. Oh no.
The cats, you know what I think happened is the cats went online and started like clawing at your thing as you were talking about it. So sorry, you had just dove into what we can do for cats, and then it cut out for a second. So could you repeat your answer? Sorry.
Okay, am I back though?
You're back. I think you're back. Okay, sure, I'll let you know.
There's so many Zoom school things going on in our house these days that sometimes our internet gets overwhelmed. So cats are a tricky thing because they kill things. They are predators, and yet they also are not predators that respond to the natural signals in the environment. And so as their prey population disappear. We don't have cats starving because most of them come back inside and we feed them and then we let them back out again. And so there's a disconnect there. And one of the things we know about cats is that they are killing hundreds of millions of birds and other critters every year. And so they have almost certainly a strong impact on populations. Anyway, so cats are complicated, and are there ways of changing that on a societal level? I suspect so. You know, as individuals, we can certainly choose to keep our cats inside. You know, Nature Canada is a great source of information. They've been doing a lot of neat work thinking about cats and ways to keep cats happy and safe. And that's one of the really important things, I think, in terms of cats, pet cats, is that they stay inside, they're safer, they live longer. Yeah, anyway, so you know, municipalities absolutely can enact that kind of legislation. Is there the political will right now? Not yet.
I'm really happy we got that question. It's something that actually hasn't come up in a lot of our bird presentations in the past, so thank you for answering that, even if the cats did try and derail your answer. All right, I'm going to go to Pranay and Bernicia in Toronto. If you guys have a question, you should be. Okay, so Pranay and Bernicia, for whatever reason, it's not letting me demute your microphone. So if you got, there you go, you should be good to go now.
You have a question for me?
We don't have a question.
Oh, that's okay. Well, I'm glad you've enjoyed it, and thanks for being here, guys. That's fantastic. All right, well, we've got a bunch of questions from YouTube. So one of the questions that we're getting variations on a lot of is, you know, have you explored Ottawa? Have you explored Toronto? Have you explored? So you mentioned a bunch of resources. Is there something that, you know, regardless of municipality, province, or state that you happen to be in, that you can find out information about the birds locally to you? Is this something that you can do through the Cornell Lab of Ornithology or you know, Wildlife Services Canada or what have you?
Yeah, so absolutely. So there are two great sources of information for that local scale neighborhood information. One is eBird and the Cornell Lab. So eBird, all of the data they're gathering, you know, individual cell phones are picking up that information, and that information is shared. You know, not obviously the individual person's information, but the locations of those observations, et cetera, are shared. And so you can zoom in really, really fine scale using that eBird tool to see what's been observed in your neighborhood. They have an app called Merlin, which is a bird identification app that also gives you information on how likely it is that you saw the bird that you think you saw, given where you are and what time of year it is. You know, it's that great tool that'll say, no, I don't think you saw that bird. That's really unlikely. So it provides that kind of local scale information. The other source of information that is locally really important is that there are all kinds of, across the continent, there are local naturalist clubs, and those might be Audubon Society clubs. They might be, you know, here in Ottawa, we have the Ottawa Field Naturalist Club. In Ontario, there's the Ontario Field Naturalist can direct you to a local club. There are hundreds of people in your neighborhood, realistically speaking, who know a lot about the natural world and are more than happy to share that information, share that knowledge.
Fantastic. Thanks, Adam. All right, we're going to wrap up with a few more questions. One might be difficult, but it's an easy question. Do you have a favorite bird?
Yeah, it's a little bit boring. It's the white-throated sparrow.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Why? Is there a reason?
It was the very first bird song I ever learned. They are sort of a ubiquitous bird in this part. I live in Ottawa and grew up fairly close to here, and going canoe trips in Algonquin Park, and so it's that the white-throated sparrow, for those who don't know, is that sweet, sweet Canada, Canada, Canada. It's this clear, beautiful whistle, and they're adorable. It's chunky little.
Fantastic. That's awesome. All right. And then actually 2 quick questions. If people want to learn more about you, you've highlighted a lot of amazing resources on birds, and we have more questions on YouTube than we can possibly answer in one of these sessions. So if people want to learn more from you or about the work that you're doing, where can they go?
So I'm on Twitter. And so they're welcome to search me out on Twitter. It's at Adam Clark Smith, one word. You can find me there. And yeah, and the Canadian Wildlife Service, State of Canada's Birds, And from the State of Canada's Birds, you can get links to the North American Breeding Bird Survey, which is one of the key surveys that I analyze every year, and so constantly working on that. The last thing I was going to say. Oh, it just left my head.
If you think of it later, we'll share it in the chat box.
Super.
So, the question we've gotten a ton of variations on YouTube to wrap this up, and I'm sure all our live viewers have it too, is, okay, so we leave this session, we've learned from you, we understand the scale of the problem, what can we do right now? So you mentioned cats, which is fantastic, be cognizant of your cats, keeping them indoors. What else can we do to help increase bird populations the moment we leave today?
Yeah, and so some of the things you can that you can do is think about what you're eating and how you're eating, because food waste and our agricultural processes have a really strong impact on the natural world around us. You can choose exclusively grass-fed beef, which is actually surprisingly really important from an ecological standpoint for grassland birds, one of the groups of birds that decline the most in North America. That rangeland is really important. You can find bird-friendly coffee. There are a couple places around now that have certified bird-friendly coffee, and so shade-grown coffee is a really important resource to migratory birds. So all the birds that come here, not all of them, of course, lots of the birds that come here in the summer spend most of the year in the tropics, and they benefit from that shade-grown coffee. Shade-grown coffee is also delicious. You can make your windows safe for birds. Collisions with windows is, when you think about your house, and maybe once or twice a year you see a bird collide with the window, and you find this poor gorgeous little thing that's died at the base of your window, and then you count up the number of windows in North America, and you think, oh, wait a minute, that's a lot of birds. And so if you can make your windows safe, there are products online that you can find. Again, Cornell is a great resource for that. The American Bird Conservancy and Birds Canada have good information on that sort of process. But if you make the glass visible to birds, break up the reflections, etc., you can drastically reduce the number of birds that are colliding with your windows. Plastics, carbon emissions, pollutants in the environment, local, naturally grown food is really important. Pesticides have a lot of, there are many complex things going on in the natural world that are causing some of these declines. And so the big change that we need to make is big, it's systemic. And so thinking about your political activities is also really important in terms of those decisions we make as a society. We need to support the natural world and incorporate that into all of the decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis.
Fantastic. I couldn't have pictured a more comprehensive answer if I tried. And I know it's a really complicated topic, so I really appreciate that. For bird stickers too, this is something that we've addressed in a lot of our past presentations. This isn't just something you can do at your home, but at your office. If you live in a skyscraper especially, see if your colleagues are willing to do that, see if the building's allowed to do that, and it's something that is an easy fix that can make a real impact. So I encourage you to check that out. Again, a lot of the resources that Adam have mentioned, I've been putting on the YouTube chat bar, so you can check them all out there, and I encourage you to do so. Dr. Smith, this was a fantastic presentation. And so what we do at the end of every one of our talks is I'm going to demute the microphones of all our live groups. And so if our teachers and students joining at home could join me in saying a huge thank you to you. You are all now demuted. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. For our people joining online, too, from, again, numerous states, numerous provinces across Canada, we really appreciate you being here. Dr. Smith, thank you so much again for a fantastic talk today.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Jesse. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Bye for now, guys. See you.